For years, I played the part of the perfect, grieving daughter for my father and his new wife. But on Mother's Day, I decided it was time for the performance to end. I handed my stepmother a beautifully wrapped gift. It looked like a sentimental album, but as she turned the pages, her perfectly composed face began to crumble because she wasn't looking at cherished memories. She was looking at the meticulously documented evidence of her own destruction. My mother was gone, and the world had lost its color. She was taken by a melanoma that moved with terrifying speed. One minute she was complaining of a nagging headache, and just 82 days later, I was a ghost in a new black dress, watching them lower her into the ground. I was 11. My father waited a respectable, calculated year before he brought Cassandra home. She was a colleague from his investment firm, a woman with unnervingly perfect teeth and lacquered blonde hair that seemed immune to the wind. She was the type who considered high heels appropriate attire for a casual cookout. "She makes me happy, Emily," he told me, his voice a soft but unyielding command. "I need you to make an effort." And so I did. I became an actress in my own home. I helped Cassandra unpack her life into ours, my arms filled with boxes of designer shoes that I carried into the closet that still held the faint, earthy scent of my mother's gardening clothes. I gave a polite, hollow nod as she systematically erased my mother from our home, replacing our family portraits with cold, abstract art to open up the space. My mother's beloved, chaotic vegetable garden was the next to go, paved over to create a sterile, meditation patio because, as Cassandra put it, growing one's own food was just so provincial. For 3 years, I was the model stepdaughter. I wore the expensive, uncomfortable dresses she selected for me to her endless corporate galas. I endured the condescending cooing of her friends, who marveled at how incredibly mature I was for my age. Behind the mask of perfect grades and a placid smile, I was drowning in a grief I wasn't allowed to show. My father, caught in the whirlwind of Cassandra's social ambitions and the new, high-value clients she charmed, never noticed that the light had gone out in my eyes. He was too consumed by their weekend retreats to wine country and exclusive club memberships. Every night, I secretly clutched my mother's old sweater, inhaling the last, fading traces of her perfume until one day, there was nothing left. Cassandra's attempts at mothering were as shallow as her smile. She showered me with extravagant gifts that were always a reflection of her own tastes, not mine. She threw lavish dinner parties where I was paraded around as our daughter, a prop for people who would forget my name the moment I walked away. Her most celebrated act of generosity was starting a college fund in my name, a fact she made sure to announce at every possible opportunity. But when I was scared and confused by the first signs of womanhood, it was a search engine that became my guide. When nightmares of my mother's last days left me shaking in the dark, it was our golden retriever who licked the tears from my face. The illusion shattered completely during my sophomore year. I had poured my heart into the school play, landing the lead role. It was the first spark of passion I had felt since my mother's death. But opening night was scheduled on the same evening as one of Cassandra's most important charity events. "Well, you'll have to miss the play, obviously," she stated, her eyes glued to her phone as she scrolled through the guest list. "The Richardsons are attending, and they're bringing their son. He's a junior at Princeton. It's about making connections, Emily." My father started to protest, a flicker of his old self, but a single, warning touch from Cassandra on his arm was enough to silence him. "It's just a school play," he conceded, his voice flat. "There will be other opportunities." That night, a cold rage settled in my heart. I went to my room and took out a small, antique jewelry box my mother had left for me. Tucked inside, beneath her wedding band and a tiny lock of my own baby hair, was a leather-bound journal. I had never been able to bring myself to open it, terrified of what her final thoughts might contain. But now, fueled by a fresh wave of betrayal, I read it from cover to cover. Much of it was what I expected, a mother's love poured onto paper. Her dreams for my future, her favorite memories of us, the advice she knew she wouldn't be there to give. But the very last entry, written just 2 weeks before she died, was different. It was a warning. "If you are reading this, my sweet Emily, It began. Then I need you to know about the safe deposit box. The key is taped to the inside of this cover. What you will find there is going to change your entire world. Please know how sorry I am for this. The key was small and silver. The next morning, I feigned illness, skipped school, and took a bus to the First National Bank downtown. The branch manager, an old friend of my grandfather's, recognized me instantly. "Your mother told me you would come one day," he said, his expression somber as he led me down to the vault. Inside the cold, metal box was a treasure trove of darkness. There was a USB drive, thick folders filled with legal documents, and a long letter in my mother's elegant script. "My dearest Emily," the letter started, "I imagine by now that Cassandra has fully integrated herself into your life. The truth is, I knew about their affair for years." My hands trembled as I read on. 6 months before her cancer diagnosis, my mother had discovered my father's betrayal. She had hired a private investigator, and the evidence was all here in this box. It was a meticulous chronicle of deceit. Hotel bills from cities my father had claimed to be visiting for business, intimate text messages exchanged while my mother was at my parent-teacher conferences. "She's taking Emily to her grandmother's for the weekend. The house will be empty." And then, a message from my father that made me feel physically ill. "Can you imagine when we don't have to hide? Sometimes I wish she would just disappear." He had sent that text 4 months before my mother first got sick. But the affair was only the beginning. The folders also contained financial records, a damning trail of evidence showing that my father and Cassandra had been systematically siphoning money from my mother's family trust fund, a fund established by my great-grandfather specifically for me. They had been setting up shell corporations and offshore accounts, laundering millions of dollars that were rightfully mine. My father's signature was on every fraudulent transfer. Cassandra's was on most of them. They hadn't just been cheating, they had been planning a hostile takeover of our lives. The final, most terrifying folder contained my mother's private medical records. As her health had mysteriously and rapidly declined, she had grown suspicious. "I started feeling unwell after our anniversary dinner," she wrote. "Thomas cooked for me that night. At first, it was just fatigue, but it grew worse. The doctors were baffled. I started keeping a journal and noticed a pattern. I only had these debilitating spells after meals that he prepared." The folder contained private toxicology reports she had commissioned on her own hair samples, revealing elevated levels of heavy metals consistent with slow, methodical poisoning. "I can't prove it was him," my mother's letter concluded. "And by the time you're old enough to understand this, it will be too late for me. But I could not leave you in his care unprotected." The last document in the box was a copy of her revised will, changed just days before her death. Working with a team of lawyers my father knew nothing about, she had placed the house, the business, and all her remaining assets into a second, secret trust that would transfer entirely to my name on my 18th birthday. "What is yours will remain yours," she wrote. "The trustees will contact you when the time comes. But if you found this letter early, their contact information is enclosed. They are waiting for your call." I sat in that sterile, private room at the bank for what felt like a lifetime, the world I knew dissolving around me. When I finally walked out into the sunlight, the grieving girl I had been was gone, replaced by someone cold, focused, and patient. I didn't go to the police. I didn't confront my father. I went home and began to play my part more convincingly than ever before. For the next 2 years, I was the daughter Cassandra had always wanted. I excelled in every subject, joined all the right clubs, and smiled my way through their soul-crushing corporate events. But at night, my bedroom transformed into a war room. I cross-referenced every business deal my father mentioned at the dinner table, tracing the flow of money through his network of fraudulent accounts. I expanded on my mother's work, creating my own ledgers and spreadsheets. I secretly recorded their conversations and photographed every document he carelessly left on his desk, confident his teenage daughter was too vapid to understand corporate finance. When I was 16, 6 months after finding the letter, I contacted my mother's trustees, a forensic accountant, a lawyer specializing in white-collar crime, and a retired judge who had been my grandfather's closest confidant. I met them in the judge's wood-paneled study, laying out the original evidence and everything I had gathered since. The accountant's face was grim as he reviewed the scale of the fraud. The lawyer muttered curses under her breath. The judge looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, protective anger. "Your mother was a brilliant woman, Emily," he said. "What is it you want us to do?" I had considered every option. I could send them both to prison. I could run away and wait to claim my inheritance. But I chose a different path. "I want to be ready," I told them. "I want to learn everything there is to know about the business, about the law, about how they did this. And then I want to take it all back." The judge smiled faintly. "Your mother suspected you would say that. She left very specific instructions for your education. And so began my double life. To my family, I was a prodigy, graduating high school a year early and earning a full scholarship to Yale. But 3 times a week, under the guise of study groups and volunteer work, I was engaged in an intensive, secret apprenticeship. The accountant taught me to see the stories hidden in financial statements. The lawyer schooled me in corporate law and the legal loopholes I would need to close. The judge introduced me to his network, powerful people who had loved and respected my mother and were quietly horrified by what my father had become. The summer before I was set to leave for college, Cassandra dropped a new bombshell. She wanted to legally adopt me. "It's time we made it official," she said, her voice syrupy sweet over a lunch that cost more than my first car. I saw the calculation in her eyes. This wasn't about love. It was a strategic move to solidify her claim on the family fortune. I gave her a tearful, grateful hug and told her it was what I had always wanted. The adoption papers became a new weapon. The required financial disclosures gave my team an updated, comprehensive map of their stolen assets. We were ready. All I needed was the perfect moment. And then, Mother's Day arrived. It was always Cassandra's favorite holiday, a chance to stage a perfect family portrait for her social media followers. This year, she was planning a lavish garden party. The adoption was to be the surprise announcement. The week leading up to it, I worked tirelessly, not on a school project, but on my gift. I compiled the key pieces of evidence into a custom-made, leather-bound book. The cover was embossed in gold foil with the title, "A Daughter's Gratitude." On the morning of the party, I found her in her dressing room, agonizing over which designer dress to wear. "I have something for you," I said, handing her the elegantly wrapped box. She was genuinely surprised. I had never acknowledged her on this day before. "You should open it now," I urged when she tried to set it aside. "It's personal." She untied the ribbon and opened the book. The first page was a photograph of my mother, radiant and smiling. Cassandra's face tightened. "What is this?" she asked. "Keep reading," I said softly. Page by page. I watched her composure disintegrate. The hotel receipts. The bank transfers. The screenshots of her own cruel text messages. By the time she reached the section detailing my mother's private medical investigation, her hands were shaking violently. The final pages laid out the legal framework of my mother's secret trust, my imminent takeover of the company, and the meeting already scheduled with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "You ungrateful little," she started, her voice a venomous hiss. "Careful," I interrupted, my voice calm and low. "Your guests are arriving. And I'm still weighing my options about what to do with the information in Chapter 3. I gestured to the page detailing the toxicology reports. "Now you're going to go downstairs and be the perfect hostess. And tomorrow morning at 9, you and Dad will meet me at Judge Henderson's office. We're going to discuss the terms of your future." The party was a masterclass in tension. Cassandra was a ghost in a Chanel dress, her smile a brittle mask. I played my part to perfection, raising a toast to the woman who had taught me so much about family loyalty. When my father arrived late from a golf game, I handed him his own identical copy of the book. He read it in silence, the color draining from his face. Unlike Cassandra, he didn't lash out. He simply looked at me, a flicker of something, was it pain? Or fear? In his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Mom left it for me," I said, along with very clear instructions. That night, After the last guest had departed, Cassandra tried to flee. I found her in her bedroom, frantically stuffing jewelry into a bag. "I wouldn't do that," I said from the doorway. "There's an FBI surveillance van at the end of the street." It was a bluff, but a convincing one. She collapsed onto the bed in defeat. The meeting the next morning was short and brutal. My father and Cassandra sat opposite me and my team of trustees as Judge Henderson laid out the terms. They would sign over complete control of the company to me. They would resign from all executive positions. They would cooperate fully in the recovery of all stolen funds. In exchange, I would not press criminal charges related to the financial fraud. My father, stripped of his arrogance, signed every document without a word. When he was done, the judge slid one final paper across the table, a legally binding agreement forbidding him from contacting me directly until I turned 18. "She's my daughter," he choked out. "Sign it," I said, my voice like ice, "or I release the medical evidence to the district attorney."
He signed.
As he was being escorted from the room, he paused. "Your mother," he said, his voice ragged, "she would be proud of you." "I know," I replied. 2 months later, I sat at the head of the boardroom table. I was 17 years old and the new CEO of my family's company. I deferred my admission to Yale. Cassandra, after a brief stint in a Miami jail cell, returned to a life of quiet humiliation, her divorce from my father leaving her with nothing. My father remained a figurehead in the company, a puppet whose strings I now controlled. I sold the house that held too many ghosts and moved into the city. The investigation into my mother's death remains open, the evidence always maddeningly just short of definitive proof. I may never know for certain if my father crossed that final, unforgivable line from wishing my mother gone to making it happen. But I have her legacy. The company is stronger than ever, rebuilt on the foundation of integrity she established. Every Mother's Day, I send Cassandra a single, simple gift, a photograph of my mother, happy and alive in her garden. It's a quiet reminder, a promise I kept, a gift that will keep on giving for the rest of her life.